Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. For several years now, I've been helping schools implement trauma-informed strategies in their schools. Now, as students are starting to come back to school, the need for this is greater than ever. Here's the thing. I'm not a social worker, and I don't pretend to be. So my training really focuses on practical strategies that you can implement in your school without making your teachers feel like they have to be social workers also. I help schools implement trauma-informed strategies so that fewer discipline referrals, fewer dysregulated students, and a calmer, more focused atmosphere. And the best thing is, this training aligns perfectly with ESSER funding, so you don't have to take it out of your school budget. My clients report that they have better sense of how to help their students without adding another thing to their plate. Go to jethrojones.com/trauma to read more about it, and let's schedule a chat. That's jethrojones.com/trauma. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am excited to have Suzanne DeMallie on the podcast today. She taught for 7 years in the Baltimore County Public School System. Research into her own son's learning difficulties led her to author the Classroom Auditory Learning Issues Resolution, which was adopted by the National PTA in July of 2007. And her work has appeared in Our Children magazine, The Journal, Townsend Times, and the Baltimore Sun. She has presented at the National School Boards Association Annual Convention, to nation, state, and local PTA groups, to politicians. She was awarded the National PTA Life Achievement Award in May of 2007, the highest honor from the nation's largest child advocacy organization. She is also the author of Can You Hear Me Now? Join the conversation to make education a better choice. Suzanne, welcome to Transformative Principal.
Thank you, Jethro. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So I want to talk about the Classroom Auditory Learning Issues Resolution. The title of your book is much better than the title of the resolution. So let's talk a little bit about what got you started here and your experience with getting microphones into classrooms.
Sure. What got me started is I have 3 children, and my son, who is my middle child, was in kindergarten, and he was diagnosed with an auditory processing deficit, which for your listeners, if they don't know what that means, it means that his ears could capture all the auditory signals perfectly, but his brain had difficulty interpreting those signals, what was coming in. And so he had problems discriminating between similar sounds. And lots of times he was actually hearing sounds in a different order than they were really being said, like the word fits, F-I-T-S, he might hear as fist. F-I-S-T. So it really impacted his ability to read. It impacted his speech. I really saw also how it impacted his behavior. He just started to withdraw from his peers because they would laugh at his speech and things like that. And so I started doing a lot of research about hearing issues in children. And really, as a parent, I was just trying to do everything I could to help him and understand how when he moved into first grade in the public school system, how being in a classroom would impact his ability to hear and learn. And I uncovered this wealth of information about how there's so many children, between 15 and 20% of kids actually have a permanent hearing impairment. And another roughly 15% have a temporary hearing impairment from ear infections on any given day of the week, which really impacts the primary level students. And I learned about poor acoustics in the classroom that prevent even the normal hearing child from being able to hear and understand what their teacher's saying, particularly like the further away they're seated from the teacher in the classroom, how that sound, that decibel level drops over distance. And because of reverberation and background noise, they miss out on up to a third of what the teacher's saying because of that. And so I was uncovering all of these problems that are going on in our classrooms every single day that impact every single student. And then I also learned of a solution, a really simple solution to it. And that is give a teacher a wireless microphone and put one or more speakers in the classroom and it improves every child's ability to hear and understand their teacher. And research has shown significant increase in academic achievement from using this equipment, improvement in literacy, improvement in behavior, attention, and focus. So as a parent, I started presenting this information first to where my son was going to be starting first grade, and in hopes that the school would put some of these systems in the classrooms there. And I realized this is much bigger than being about my son. This impacts all kids. So I started taking the information that I had to the Baltimore County School District, and I attended all those exciting board meetings, and I went to the budget meetings, and really, around the entire county, because we were broken into different regions. And I started sharing this information with our district. And then I realized, again, this is bigger than just Baltimore or the state of Maryland. So I really spent 4 years of my life just trying to share this information with the entire nation. And I created a nonprofit organization, and I eventually got the National PTA to back me on the issue, and that gave me the support of 6 million members. So it became a real national issue, and I finally ended with actually making a trip to DC and actually sharing it with the congressman in DC at one point. So it just changed my life. But that's how I really got started with the whole resolution.
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating because I'll share one of my pet peeves, and that just drives me nuts every time it happens, is when you're in a large space and there's a microphone being passed around for people to talk, and there's always the teacher who says, "I'm a teacher, I don't need it," and they use that as the reason for why they should not have to have the microphone. And it just drives me bonkers every time somebody says that, because it's not about you. It's about the people being able to hear you.
Right.
If your information is not important enough for everybody to be able to hear it equally as well as everybody else, then why should we even give you the time to talk? Because it does matter. And if you are in a large room and you try to yell to fill the whole room, it's very difficult to do that. And inevitably, they are talking to the person at the front of the room. And so they're facing away from everybody else. And if you just had a microphone, it would be so much easier. So that is one thing that if I'm ever at a conference and somebody says, "I don't need a microphone, I have a teacher voice," it just drives me nuts. So I can really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yes. And I did encounter that many times when I would be sharing my information lots of times. And they're wrong. The science proves them wrong. But, I don't know if it's just a pride issue or what, but, the research shows that when kids are seated more than 8 feet away from the teacher, they are at a significant disadvantage. And, you can use a loud voice as much as you can, but first of all, you're going to strain your voice if you continually do that all day, but it also will not achieve the same effect as if they just use a microphone.
Yeah. And if I'm ever in a presentation and somebody says that to me, I will shame you in front of everybody, just so you know.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for helping me on this.
And so no problem. So at my second school, my first school, we didn't have any voice amplification. At my second school, we had the kind that you wear around your neck like a necklace. And man, I put that thing on and I wore it with pride every single day. And then the best part is, and this is honest, Suzanne, I started talking quieter and people started having a harder time hearing me when I was just talking a normal conversation because I didn't need to yell or project as much with a microphone, and I could just talk in a normal voice like you and me sitting here next to each other, just talking. And it was wonderful. And what I really appreciate about that is that kids didn't feel like they had to yell. I didn't have to feel that way either. And it really made a difference in our whole classroom atmosphere. So we could probably talk about that for a while, but the important thing is I'm going to shame you if you say I have a teacher voice and I don't need to.
Please do. Need a microphone, because
you do. Yeah. And part of that may have been me working in audio engineering in high school or in college and right after college, where I was working on, in large centers for speakers, making sure that people could hear them. And it just made such a huge difference. So Anyway, going forward now, you have this book called Can You Hear Me Now? Join the Conversation, Make Public Education a Better Choice. And you say some pretty intense things in there. So let's talk a little bit about that book. And we'll just talk about one or two of the messages that you really want people to hear from this book. So there's violence in education in schools across the country. There is large amounts of kids who can't read, who can't do math. You can take your pick. What are the issues that you see as one of the, we'll just talk about one right now, one issue that you think is really important that we need to be talking about?
For me personally, I think the one of the reasons I really went beyond just, saying, hey, I think I would like to write a book, to actually doing it. It has to do with an experience, and it relates to what you're asking me, where I was in a student support team meeting, and I had brought up a student I was concerned about. I was a 4th grade math teacher, and this student was on a 1st grade math level. And I recognized it at the beginning of the year that there were significant gaps. I did everything I could, as most teachers, to try to fill in those gaps using research-based interventions, brought him up to team. And, finally, it was March, and we were having like a follow-up student support team meeting to see how those research-based interventions had helped or not. And I made the recommendation to the team that this student not be passed on to 5th grade, because I was concerned that he wasn't ready for it. And he was also significantly behind in reading as well. So it wasn't just a math issue. And I had gotten the support from his parent, which isn't always easy to do, but I had shared this concern early on in the year with her, and we had been in great communication throughout the year. And we both saw a significant decline in his self-esteem and just his ability to focus in the class, because he just started tuning out and sort of giving up. And mom was concerned about that too. And so I had shared this, my recommendation with the support of the parent at this meeting. And I was told, no, he was going to move on to 5th grade. And the reason that I was given is because there were so many other kids in the school in 4th grade that were even further behind than he was. And they would be moving on to 5th grade. So he needed to move with them. And I left that meeting and felt literally sick, because I felt like I'm doing the wrong thing. This is not going to be good for the child. I felt like we were lying to the parent to say he's ready to be moved on. And I think that was just kind of the breaking point for me to say enough is enough. Like, we need to really honestly confront these problems in education. And this was not an isolated incident. This was, I'm referring to this one story, but every single year as a teacher, I had many kids starting out the year who were multiple grade levels behind where they should be. And I can't even imagine what the high school teacher deals with, because I was an elementary teacher, and every year that academic gap grows, it's harder to fill. So by the time they're getting to high school, it's, I don't know how those teachers handle it. So I think, to me, that is one of the biggest problems in public education right now, is we are moving these kids on from one grade level to the next, basically based on chronological age. They are, we've set these high standards. We have these Common Core standards that were supposedly very rigorous, and they are, but we're not holding the kids accountable for meeting them. We're just moving them along. And that's not doing anyone any good. So to me, that is really one of the biggest problems that I hope really gets addressed from this book.
Yeah, I wouldn't have supported you in holding the kid back either, but for a slightly different reason, which is what good is it going to do to hold him back if we're not going to change anything that we're doing about how we're teaching him? Yeah, making a kid repeat a grade when we're just going to do the same thing we did is just ridiculous also. So there are a few ways that we could approach that problem in a way that is actually healthy. Like, for example, not caring about whether or not kids learn things at the same time as other people, which is part of the problem, because that is a natural occurrence that people will learn things at different times than other people. That's okay. So instead of our emphasis being, you need to know X, Y, and Z to move on to the next grade, perhaps what we should be more focused on is you need to learn how to read and do basic math as soon as you can. And we're going to take as long as it takes for you to learn that.
John Catt Educational supports high-quality teaching and learning by providing publications that are research-based, practical, and focused on the key topics proven essential in today's and tomorrow's schools. The latest John Catt publications include a book whose bold, transformative ideas amaze and infuriate people around the world, according to one reviewer, a title from global leaders in curriculum planning, practice, and retrieval, one book that says stop talking and start doing with regard to teacher well-being, and much more. These books, used by educators of all roles across North America and worldwide, amplify fresh, engaging voices with practical strategies to create transformative change. Learn more in our show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast.
You don't know this, but the listeners all do because I talk about it all the time, so I apologize. My oldest daughter has Down syndrome. She is still not going to get the math concepts in 9th or 10th grade because she is not ready to develop in that area yet. And I am okay with that. The difference is that we have a plan in place and a way to help her do that. And we have patience recognizing that's going to happen because she has an individualized education plan for her, which I believe every single student needs. And rather than say, you're in 4th grade, therefore you must learn these things, we should recognize that these things are the things you need to learn. And we care enough about those that we're going to ensure that you learn those things at some point. And that may take longer for some kids. In fact, we know it will, and we need to be okay with that. And part of our problem is we're just not okay with kids learning at different rates, even though they do it all the time anyway. We just get upset about it, which is completely ridiculous in my mind.
I agree 100%. And I think maybe if we did something instead of having standards attached to the grade level, but rather standards attached to each course, like Math 101, we have standards for Math 101. And when you've met those standards, you go to Math 102. Until you've met them, we're going to try different ways to help you meet those Math 101 standards. And, because kids right now, we kind of assume that every 10-year-old is going to master the reading and the math and science and social studies standards all for that year, at the same time. And it just, like you said, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, none of us, we all learn at different rates. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and we need to recognize that. And I agree with you 100% on what you're saying.
And so, for example, recently the state of California, in the name of equity, said we're going to stop doing gifted and talented education. And we're going to stop differentiating where kids are in math. And it's like they're taking a step in the wrong direction because they're doubling down on kids all learning the same thing at the same time, when the beauty of the world we live in with people is that we do all learn at different rates. And that is okay for that to happen. It's not a bad thing that that's happening. So kids who are struggling are not going to be any better assisted by that, because they're going to have more kids and the teacher's going to be more stressed trying to differentiate for a much broader spectrum than if we could find ways to help kids right where they're at with what they need in that moment. And that's a tall order and would require our schools to change how they're doing business. But I don't think that it's impossible. So what are your suggestions for how to solve some of these problems?
Well, the one that we were just talking about, again, I think that we really, right now we kind of do what I was just talking about as far as having standards by course level when the kids are in high school. High schools kind of function that way, and then colleges, definitely work that way. I think we need to do it starting at the elementary level. Do it for each course that they're taking, each content area, each subject. Because you have some kids, for one thing, that are great at math, but they're not great at reading, or vice versa. So, this would allow those kids who, I have the excellent reader, but struggling in some math skills, to keep going further ahead in reading and not being held back. And then we can really focus in and help the child on the math skills. I really think that we do need to make a massive overall change like that. And it is very complicated. there's a lot of considerations, especially when you talk about logistics and, well, what do you do with, the child who's in, there wouldn't be a fourth grade anymore, but they're at a certain level, maybe in sort of the normal level or age appropriate level for a reading class, but they're really super gifted in math and the teachers for that are all in a different location. So there's a lot of complications, but I think that we really start to, we need to give some serious thought to that problem, because it is a huge problem, because we have kids that are, in high school and they can't read and they can't write and they can't do basic math, and they're graduating, or they're dropping out because they're just giving up. So we have to do something.
Yeah. And the dropping out is much more common, I think, than we like to admit. My district in Fairbanks, Alaska, our graduation rate was about 80%. 80%, right. That means 1 in 5 kids are not graduating. And graduation is not that tough of a goal to accomplish. It can be done, but it requires some flexibility and awareness of how to help kids get to that point. So one of the things that schools often do is they do summer school or after school programs. And my problem with both of those is that you tell kids all day they're dumb by giving them failing grades and they struggle through their classes. And then you keep them after school and tell them they're dumb some more.
Right.
And then you keep them in the summer and tell them they're dumb again. And no teacher is intentionally saying you're dumb and this is what's happening. But the way that the school is set up and the way the curriculum is set up reinforces that idea that, yes, they are dumb because they're not getting it as fast as someone else may be. And it doesn't have to be that way. And those interventions could be helping some kids, but more often than not, they're probably making kids reaffirm that they are dumb, which is not how we want kids to be feeling when they leave school.
And that they hate school and they hate learning. It's also sending that message as well. I agree. And I think it has a really big impact on behaviors in the classroom as well. Because when you have kids sitting in the classroom and they cannot do the work independently and they're struggling through it and they keep getting papers back with E's and F's on them, saying that, yep, you don't know what you're doing, you're dumb. That's the message we're sending. I think it's going to cause them to tune out, and then it is going to cause them to, get into trouble and have behavior issues. So I think it contributes to that problem, which I talk about in the book as well.
Yeah. When you know you can get out of class by being a punk, then you're going to be a punk to get out of feeling dumb, because I'd rather be a punk than be dumb. I'd rather be the class clown than be dumb. And my own personal problem was different when I was in high school, where I was fine being the class clown so that I wouldn't be bored, because things were not moving fast enough for me and they were not reaching me at my level. And the game of school was very easy for me to do because I knew exactly what I needed to do to get the grade that was good enough for me to not have to retake the class. This was in high school. And it was a matter of recognizing that school is a game and figuring out how to play the game so that I could be successful. And to be honest, Suzanne, that was what I told all the students when I was a principal who were struggling. I said, look, this is a game. You got to think of it as a game, because that's all it is. If you know how to play the game, then you're going to be able to get good grades, have your teachers like you, and move on to the next grade without any issues. And that's the advice that I give kids. And it's shameful that I have to give that advice to kids, because that's how they have to get through and be able to be
that's
successful.
That's the way the system works.
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation. I think that we could talk about a lot of this stuff. I appreciate your simple approach to how to solve some of these things. So thank you for that. I want to narrow down to an action step, though. What is one thing that a principal could do this week to be a transformative principal?
You might laugh at me, but I would say give my book to each one of your teachers, because I think I had a teacher actually do this. They read the book themselves, and this is a teacher who's been in the system for more than 30 years. And then he gave it to his principal and said, right before spring break, and said, I'd like you to read this, and I'd like us to schedule a meeting to sit down and talk about it afterwards. And it just started that conversation. I don't know exactly what their conversation was. I didn't, I wasn't privy to that, but that's what we need to do. We need to be honest about, I think principals, if they talk to their teachers and they say, I know the system isn't perfect. I know it's flawed. I know that we have problems, but I want to do what we can to make it better. And we can start, we may not be able to solve all of the problems in public education, but we can start with the problems in your classroom. And I think just principals being honest about that everything is not perfect and it is difficult to make a change, but we can start by making a change, maybe in your classroom. Help me to do it. Help me to know what is really the problem that you see. And don't just tell me about the problems, but tell me your ideas for a solution. And that's really what I try to get at in the book. It's that it's not just saying, we have this problem and that problem. And it's not a book of complaints. It's a book to say, here are the honest realities of some policies and practices that had some really good intentions, but they are not working everywhere. And, so what can we start thinking about to either try to tweak those policies and make them better or to change them completely? And what can we do? And that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And that's something that's really simple. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to change, and we can try to change them systemically, which requires a huge lift in a lot of different ways, or we can try to start changing them in our classroom. And I think that both approaches are necessary. You need to devote 4 years of your life to get microphones into schools. But then when you became a teacher, you used the microphone, and that's a really simple way to ensure that your students have the best opportunities for success because of what you personally are doing, which is what teachers do every single day of the year, day in and day out. Right. So this has been fantastic. Really appreciate it. If people want to connect with you on Twitter, it's Suzanne DeMallie on Twitter. And then on your website is SuzanneDeMallie.com, correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. If they go to my website, they can access my social media links through the website, and they can also contact me through that as well.
And so I encourage people to check that out and to go there, SuzanneDeMallie.com. And it's been great talking with you. And I think we can probably have you on again in the future and talk more about some of these other issues that we're seeing.
That would be great. I would love that. Thank you.
Hey, middle school principals, what if I told you that all your teachers had to do to teach your students really valuable social and emotional competencies was just press play? In Control SEL is a fully automated video curriculum that teachers and students absolutely love. And that's because it's easy, and it looks just like a Netflix or a YouTube show. So all you have to do to hear about how it can completely transform your school is schedule your call. Tell us Jethro sent you and you'll get 20% off if you feel like it's a good fit. So go now to www.incontrolsel.com/strategy call to schedule your call today. The link will be in the show notes.